Um, just kind of rant. I don't know if this is gonna be just for me or if I'm gonna put this out to the world or whatever. But I'm actually really excited now for a couple reasons that have to do with movies. I mean, I could be excited for a lot of reasons, but I have two things in movies that are happening that are really cool to me. Which I'm going to start by talking about kind of how, to me, the most important, I'd say, honestly, the most important, most relevant, the best, literally, fantastical, I guess, at least, books that exist ever, of all time. There's two of them, and it's Frankenstein and Dracula. For some reason, I can't remember what Frankenstein is written like. Actually, there might be some more. I wanted to read Beloved, because I'd been introduced to it for class, and I, pretended to read it, a long, long time ago in high school, I think. But that sounds like a really good, kind of fantastical, especially kind of like a monster. There's a ghost kind of situation. I can't exactly remember how Frankenstein is written. I'm trying to get a quick reminder. But I think, it's someone's kind of diary. It's the doctor's diary, I guess, right? Or maybe at some point it's kind of like a recalling of events is kind of what it is, for the sake of history is kind of how he describes it. The doctor, which I think is cool, never want anyone to repeat my mistake. I think that's well played out in that book, where it feels really no, what did you do? I'm scared, I'm freaking out. And then he's like, no, I did that. And it's and then it's no, I was captivated reading it the first time I did. And I remember there wasn't a lot of books that had me really hooked. And the way it kind of connects to her personal life, the author, and her experiences with literally childbirth and miscarriage, we're just it's just everything about it's really cool to me. And then the next one is Dracula. I already said both, I guess, but Dracula is written as letters between people, that are almost collected by a historian or something to recall this kind of event. It's really cool. I really love the they're both really old, but I really love the style so much of how they're kind of written, and the way it's this the mortification in these two stories from the main characters, that what's going on, and the way they have to grasp what's going on is so cool to me. But then what's amazing that's happening basically is that we're gonna have in December, I think on Christmas, there's a new Nosferatu movie, which is so cool to me. I mean, I have so many things I could start with, but I'm gonna start with the book, because I was talking about those. But the Dracula book, which obviously inspired Nosferatu, is kind of probably out of Frankenstein and Dracula even more relevant, or not relevant, but important to me, significant and stuff. And I really love the medical aspect of a lot of the horror, kind of some of the most scary parts, or kind of intense moments, involve the way it was shocking for people at the time to grasp the impacts of a blood transfusion, and the way it felt. So, and I feel especially because it probably was, it's so interesting to think about, but it probably felt so unclean to do that. And that's kind of expressed so vividly, and I really love that about that book. And that one, it's kind of really interesting to me how Bram Stoker, the author, has this really kind of parasocial for a relationship himself in his own life with Walt Whitman, and that's barely connected. But to me, it's really cool how in the book there's kind of this ambiguity with and even in the first Nosferatu movie, we'll get into these things actually, the movies later. Well, we'll get into these things later. But in the what I was going to say, though, is in the first Nosferatu movie, it's really cool even. There's kind of this strange moment where, like, it almost feels sometimes like there's a subtext that there was, like, intimacy or, like, this kind of violation sometimes in an intimate way between the vampire and his victim specifically. Like, it feels like there's, like, a... in terms of sexuality, it feels very fluid. Always, like, how the monster's interactions with people are presented, and it kind of feels like that's part of the like transgressive nature of the being, is that it's so violent. And also I thought it was personally really interesting how because in this one like kind of picture or like kind of like text screen during the Nosferatu movie, I was rewatching it. I don't know if I ever fully watched it actually, but I was watching it. I didn't even get through all of it. But in one of those ones, the text, like whatever screens for during Nosferatu, it's like a quote, like it's like what he's saying, the count to our main character. I forgot his name. I forgot his name. But he's telling the main character that he sleeps during the day and that he's, quote, like, completely dead to the world or something like that. And I thought that was really interesting in the lens of this intimacy thing, and, like, how that's so kind of taboo and crazy for people at the time, because it's like, oh, he's basically saying, like, no, like, because this is, like, right before he tells the guy who just got there, like, no, we're going to spend a night together, and the guy's freaking out, but then, like, falls asleep mysteriously under strange circumstances. There's kind of, to me, this subtext that he's like, no, nobody's going to find out if something potentially embarrassing happens between us, because I don't even exist in the world. Kind of like a, I'm discreet type of vibe. And so I think it's interesting now to get into these more modern things, that on Christmas there's going to be a new Nosferatu movie, which is like so, I feel like that's so legendary in general, and like that cast is really good. There's Willem Dafoe, who did like great things obviously, and like the guy from Bridgerton, which is funny. I mean, he's probably obviously well versed in like old fashioned movies and stuff. I mean, yeah, Willem Dafoe even does a lot of like old timey pieces. And then Lily Rose Depp plays like the main like woman, I guess, and that's so interesting to me, because like I really could see that with when I looked at the original movie. Now that I like think about this more critically, it's like she does have those eyes, I think, that could kind of like leave you with that same feeling that like the original actress did, because the original actress does a really good job with like her facial expressions, I feel like. And that's kind of something that I think in The Idol we did see was really good with Lily Rose Depp. I mean, like, even in the first scene of the entire show, it's just her looking at the screen and, like, showing a range of emotions, like, on the spot, right away, one take, no cuts. And, what's really cool to me also is that I had just realized this yesterday, but this is really insane to me. Now, like, I've always also, this is like on the more surface level, I've kind of always felt a connection to Nosferatu, because like in my family, my grandma like works in movies, and kind of like my mom would see a lot of movies with her, and like I think that's one that really scared my mom when she was a kid, was like a more modern remake of Nosferatu. Because the original one's like 1922. I think my mom saw one that was like in maybe the early 80s. And that was like really scary and crazy. And I remember just like feeling like so intrigued by this idea of like scary movies like being like, a thing, and like so kind of like such an approachable kind of like shocking thing in our I don't know, I was really interested in anything scary, I think, as a kid, and just to know I kind of had like, in a way, I don't know, there's just kind of like, I feel like I've had conversations about it multiple times before I was into Dracula, before there was this new movie coming out, because also Dracula I was reading like a while ago, like these are slowly evolving things. But also what's really funny is that like that one episode of SpongeBob that everybody can remember, where SpongeBob is like flickering lights no, what am I talking about? Where SpongeBob is like at the place and it's nighttime and it's scary and there's the guy with the spatula hand. But then he's flickering the lights or whatever, and then they figure out that the guy with the spatula hand was this faker. And then they were like, well, who is flickering the lights? And it's literally Nosferatu. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that. Like, it was literally Nosferatu. And that's one of the most, like, one of the only episodes I can really, like, right now, like, remember, like, vividly, like, the imagery of. It was scary for no reason. And I remember that clip specifically of Nosferatu, too, as being, like, what the fuck? Like, you know, like, shocking stuff. But, you know, and, like, scary. And I think that's really cool that, like, as a kid, I kind of picked up on that and was, like, marked by that. Because, like, honestly, the actor does an amazing job in the original one, like, at being, like, a very menacing and, like, strange, eerie presence in a way that's, like, hard. Like, you don't realize that that's not something that's easy to do when you're not using a lot of special effects and, like, you know, things like that. It's, like, pretty interesting. And I think in the modern movie, to think about the connection that movie always has with, like, LGBT folk, or not really folk, but like in the way that it's been a lot of times connected to ideas about how the LGBT are viewed by society, and also the way that the LGBT engage in relationships. Like, it's kind of connected to the relationships between characters, like in Dracula, and I'm presuming in Nosferatu as like a vampire movie. It's kind of interesting. There's always a lot of vampires, like even I forgot the woman's name. Oh, Carmilla. Like, the woman vampire was, you know, attracted to women. And I do think that it's, like, good that, or cool that, you know, like, to me, I don't know actually for the rest of the cast, but at least that Lily Rose Depp is, like, you know, LGBT, getting an LGBT role for real. Like, but no, anyways, that's kind of how excited I'm feeling. I mean, it's coming on Christmas too. That's kind of just, like, funny. They have they have a lot of cool stuff. Like, I think there's been really good reviews already, like, from people who saw early premieres and stuff. So I'm feeling excited. So yeah, we'll be seeing that immediately when that comes out. You can trust. I'll try and see it before it comes out even. You can trust on that too. But like, I was able to see Nora early, and that was really amazing to me. I have a little letter I wrote, or I came up with on the fly. I didn't even, like, draft it or anything. I kind of just came up with these words I had about Nora that I'll be potentially presenting through my YouTube, you know, to the world, and maybe to Sean Baker if he hears somehow. No, he's getting accolades. Like, I don't think there's any chance. I think he's getting a lot of attention right now, a lot of emails, a lot of which is, like, great. I love to see it, because I was like, you know, well, if I publish that thing, you guys will hear about my personal experience with Sean Baker content, but it's been always great. Anyways, to get back to my conversation about Frankenstein and Dracula, they're just crazy like that. Like, no one does it like them. Because then also what it breaks down to, which is so cool to me, is that a lot of the media, like, is, like, overtly or not, like, inspired by those ones. I mean, there's a lot more, but, like, I know vampires and, like, the ideas of, like, vampires and, like, you know, extending that kind of, like, cannibalism. I mean, I know Bones and All, to me, like, the movie feels like a vampire movie, not gonna lie. But just, like, vampire media is so cool to me. I know as a kid, again, like, My Babysitter's a Vampire was literally that show for me. Like, it was, like, the show that was, like, that had everything I needed to be, like, perfectly stimulated. I feel like especially as like a live action show where I was like kind of like young enough where I was mostly watching cartoons, like it made me really have that transition where I was like, no, this is fire. And just like the barely kind of, there's always this kind of like seductive and like, I don't know how to put it, like it's very stimulating in that way for someone like me that's kind of like attracted to those parts of life that are a little bit more mysterious but potentially dopamine filled in that weird way. And it's always kind of like in media, it's always these really cool things. I love to see like vampire media, and like I know the season of American Horror Story Hotel that has vampires, it's like a little bit unpopular, I think, compared to others, but to me it's like always been really cool how it has that energy it has, and it just feels very everybody feels like they had the same picture of what kind of like the vampire like acts like, and how they really feel. It was just to me it was just really cool. It just didn't feel like corny, crazy, speaking with that fake accent type of vibe. It felt like really cool and not overdone. I don't know. But now to get into Frankenstein, I just found out literally minutes ago before picking up my voice memos and recording this, that there's a new Frankenstein by Guillermo del Toro, I guess, coming out in 2025 with Mia Goth, Jacob Elordi, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what the hell? And I'm like, also, this is something else I said. I find Lily Rosette to be one of the most like attractive people in media right now. Like, and I also feel that way about Jacob Elordi. Like, these are two of the most attractive people, like, objectively, let's be so honest, to be on the screens. And so when I think about my two favorite movies having these hot people, two of the hottest people that are out right now as top roles, and this is Mia Goth too. Let's not joke around. Mia Goth is really attractive too. I think Lars Mikkelsen, I think he's attractive. I don't know. I mean, the other one, what's his name, is hella attractive. If we're gonna get into it, what's his name? Right? Willem Dafoe. He could get with anybody's mother. I'm joking. That's scary. But let's be serious. Let's be serious a little bit. No, I'm like really excited for these movie with these, and I think like even there's something about kind of the way I saw Jacob Elordi in Euphoria that feels like I could see this sort of Frankenstein role working really well, where I could see this lifelessness and this like, kind of like obscure way of like behaving that I saw in Euphoria translating pretty well to like literally someone that's reanimated and has like a new consciousness in the way that Frankenstein is like conceptualized too. And also I was just gonna get into it. I really love Frankenstein media too, and I didn't realize this for a long time. There's a TV show. Oh my gosh, I want to find out what it was. French Frankenstein TV show. I'm Googling right now. But it was like a really fire TV show for no reason. And I just remember being so into it for kind of no reason. Oh, is it called Frankenstein's Cat? Yes, Frankenstein's Cat. Oh my gosh, and it was a cat that was the monster. And I just like I just know these stories. It's so goofy always how the animal can, or not the animal, the Frankenstein can like rearrange itself and come back to kind of life. It's like, I haven't seen it, but like Death Becomes Her, I think, has a similar vibe where it's like people's bodies, or honestly like The Substance feels kind of like a Frankenstein-esque movie. That was one of my favorite. And that's kind of like, that felt so much like a Frankenstein-esque movie, because there's this like recklessness with the physical form and this like kind of like childish, people call it like playing God, but I think it's more just like a childish, like, it doesn't feel thought out and elaborate like playing God does. I actually talked about this at length in an essay I had to write once about Frankenstein. I think of like Frankenstein's creation as kind of like premarital, like pre-ready to have a child sex. And it's kind of this idea of like, as soon as he procreated in his mystical weird way with the universe, with science, and created a life, he was really not into it, and he was trying to get away. He actually abandons it the first night, like in the book, The Creation, and then comes back like 2 days later and it's gone, and he's like, oh, well. And I think that really makes me think of like a parent that really just didn't want to face the situation at all. Like, it's just like kind of grim to think of it that way, but that's really how it is, I think, presented, even in the lens of also like the author's experiences with childbirth and stuff. But so then it kind of just feels like there's a lot of this interesting way that for vampires, it's like very, very protective of the human body, very kind of like every part of you is sacred and can be corrupted if it's like, violated upon. That's what's something kind of scary to me about, I think that's part of the tension in a vampire movie, is like, has someone been corrupted, or vampire media, has someone been corrupted, can they be fixed? How do we avoid corruption? How do we stop these people that are immortal? It's just like a lot of it is this, these ways that we deal with people that either want to violate our bodies or have such a crazy relationship with their form, their literal like living form, that it's like scary to us and we can't understand it, like the living in the night and all this stuff. And so I think a lot of that is like really comes back to this idea of like, no, I want to have a perfectly healthy body in Jesus' name. And kind of the connection between faith and people's views of health and how health should be maintained. I think it's really cool to connect those two ideas, like health and beauty in general. But I think that makes it make sense for why, like, it's kind of like also like cigarettes remind me always of vampires, because there's this weird mood that's put off when someone that isn't like affected in a negative way visually is smoking a cigarette, like literally health-wise, where it's literally like this is like someone acting or feeling kind of like a vampire, kind of neglecting their mortality. The way a vampire literally says they're not gonna die, and doing something, and like, having a youth that isn't guaranteed, especially in that situation of being a smoker. Like, I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but just these kind of like I think it's really interesting, these kind of energies that we can explore, and that then make these like original stories become so much more widespread, kind of, and like how they can be applied. I mean, like, even Rosemary's Baby, I feel like, is kind of like a vampire story. And then that leads to Delicate, which is like one of my favorite seasons of American Horror Story, that's all about how everyone's trying to take advantage of her baby. And then, like, even thinking of a baby, it's kind of like, again, this purist, puritanical, I don't know, those are different words, but kind of this like this valuation of this value of purity as a concept, and protecting oneself from like corruption, quote unquote. And then on the other hand, I think Frankenstein feels really like, this is really crazy, but it feels like this almost like joking, like morbid, like, and this is how I feel watching all of the media that Frankenstein has. it very morbidly rejects the sacredness of the human body and explores this story where, like, one character, usually, like, the doctor or whatever, or a couple maybe, are really kind of grossed out by how much the human form is being toyed with. But as the audience, it's engrossing in a way that isn't actually, like, I don't feel like reinforces the same type of, like, anxious valuation of the form. It feels almost more like this recognition that, and I think here's why. I think when we look at even just the basic idea that when Frankenstein is brought back to life, he doesn't have any type of pre-existing consciousness, we really have ideologically separated already. Like, we've established that we've separated the body from the spirit in the way we understand those two facets of our experience. And we kind of have decided that the experience that someone has consciously is one that you only get once, and that if you were kind of quote unquote brought back to life, it would not be you. It might actually be a new consciousness that would be able to have its own experiences, you know, for better or for worse, and have its own intimacy. But a lot of the times, well, it's actually really tough. I think it's kind of like it's facilitated by the fact that a lot of modern Frankenstein stories use animals. I'm thinking of that show, the French show Frankenstein's Cat, but also Frankenweenie. I'm going to get into Frankenweenie in a second. But I would actually argue that most of the Frankenstein media that we see where it's a human that gets resuscitated, they have this, like, dullness and this incapacity to connect to people that makes me feel like usually it's not supposed to, like, be implied they're the same person spirit-wise almost. Like, they don't have the same memories, and they don't have the same they won't have the same relationships to people that they did before. And it's usually that the main characters, especially whoever kind of brought the monster back to life, so to speak, is faced with. And I think that's kind of what it is in, like, the substance. It's just like this morbid, like, that's why I feel like there's a connection so much. This morbid in the sense that the body is so played with, but this morbid also emotionally realization that we are not, there's kind of like, there's nothing as, we can't have anything, you know, this is one body, and to try and do things over doesn't feel like in any way spiritually it would. There's always this recurring theme when there's resuscitation in especially more modern media. I mean, I think in, like, really way old media, like the Bible, it's like okay sometimes, but usually nowadays, like, something gets resuscitated, it's changed, and that's not a good thing. Which is such a cool idea. I think it makes us feel like we don't need to be so attached to our body. And so I think it's really cool that there's these parallels, or not these parallels, these contrasts completely. And that it puts, like, for me, no offense, like, I feel really happy that I've seen this now, because it makes me feel really interested in how, like, you know, we do have to explore a balance between those two things. Like, you can't be too attached to your physical form, because that's literally just, like, that's just not healthy in the sense that you're going to be anxious and you're going to stress, and that's actually bad for your physical form. But on the other hand, we can't, like, totally reject the sanctity of what's ours. And as much as we have to kind of, like, jokingly acknowledge the temporary nature of our experience and how we're, like, you know, we're gonna die and we're not connected to our body spiritually, I think most people would agree that. As much as we have to connect that reality to our lived experience, we still can't let the fact that we are not connected to our body spiritually allow us to be violated by people, taken advantage of, and in any way corrupted, whether that's like by disease or like people making decisions for us and for our bodies that we wouldn't make for ourselves. I think that's really relevant when you think of politically what's been happening, and how there's like more and more violations on the body of, I would say women mostly, but everybody. And trans people weren't giving the right to have freedom over their bodies. And I think we want to, as much as we want to stop being so serious about sort of these illusionary values that even spiritually we can't kind of fully sort of contextualize with our real kind of understanding of the fact that our body and our soul is separate, regardless of our sense of our I guess what I'm saying is, regardless of the traditional ways that spirituality is used to acknowledge the sanctity of the body, and that's what I think we see a lot in these vampire movies that are heavily Christian influence, and vampire media that's Christian influence, like like Dracula specifically. There is a really cool approach to how we can be kind of like, I think it's cool for media, especially as early as it was, to look into how seduction plays into violation, and how a lot of the times, kind of in this devilish way, there is this seductive interplay between people that are violated and the people who violate them, and it's kind of something that sometimes is used to negate the experiences of the victims of that kind of experience, but I think it's really cool to look at how that's pretty common actually for someone to employ seduction as a way of ending up in a position where they can take advantage of someone. And that's also, I think, in general, we attribute more vaguely to the vampire in general. And that's kind of what I think a lot of people see Anora as. I don't, because I see her as a real person. Honestly, maybe that's because I see myself kind of as a little bit vampiric sometimes by nature. Like, I'm joking, but like, I'm kind of like, sometimes I worry in my personal relationships when I don't fully like, I don't know, I think that's a healthy worry to have, that like you'd be taking too much. But sometimes like it can be kind of something to be aware of for me. So that's why I kind of think of that. But what was I thinking about? I guess I just do think it's interesting to look at how let me think about that one. Anora, that's what I was saying, is probably by a lot of the audience that finds the story really funny and really entertaining, and kind of like this satirical take on a, stripper trying to get wealthy quick, gone wrong. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think I see a lot of people who are just laughing in that theater as having had that thought process. I'll explain all this more if I post that thing, that like those 30 minutes of me, quote unquote, talking to Sean Baker or whatever. But it did feel like in that movie, she's, as a way that I think is continually a challenge to the viewer, she's presented in a situation that makes her click to us as someone who's capable of being vampiric in how they engage with someone else, and kind of like she clicks to us as someone who uses seduction. Like, I think that's kind of what a stripper feels like. Is like someone that uses seduction to extract kind of like money out of someone. And that's something that feels kind of vampiric in just the way that we conceptualize it. We as a society. And so I do really like that not only are there literally explicitly, I mean, I could go on even further, though, thinking of movies related to, whatever. I'll say that later. But there are literally explicitly movies coming out soon that are about whether, like, literally it's the same story. I think it's cool that Nosferatu has, like, replaced Dracula. I swear there has been Dracula movies, but, like, Nosferatus are just bigger. And that's, like, interesting in the history of it. Like, I heard it, like, was supposed to be banned, but then they couldn't get it to be, like, destroyed. And so it just lived on. But, like, that even to me, I was talking about this with a friend, feels so interesting in the context of what the movie's about, because it's, like, something that literally isn't meant to be alive and is taking advantage of something that still lives on, aka Bram Stoker's estate, leeching off of it, quote unquote, but it wasn't allowed to die out because it was so seductive and enticing that it was able to keep itself alive. It's so cool. Like, it's like kind of like it like gave its essence to the movie that people made about it, and even the book. And then I think Frankenstein, maybe if we want to look at it like that, kind of feels like a collection of, like, values and ideas across history. And that's almost like Frankenstein himself. Like, he's a collection of pieces. Literally pieces of people. Kind of like, this is just all cool stuff to think about. I know Paradise Lost is a huge influence on Frankenstein. So that's what I'm thinking about when I say that. And it's kind of like, this is like a development using modern techniques of pieces made by other people, and so these stories and then also even the new Frankenstein, it's kind of like it's Guillermo del Toro's take on it, so it's kind of like he's using his pieces from his graveyard near him, but he's still making the same kind of monster in essence, and I find that to be a really cool idea to get into. I mean, his Pinocchio, I think, for some reason, makes me feel like it would make sense for him to make a Frankenstein. I don't know why. I just see the kind of, like, steampunk aesthetic as working really well. And I'm not really a steampunk girl. But, not girl. But I just, like, kind of don't really like steampunk that much. But I think for Frankenstein, it's cool to think of, like, these sci-fi aspect of it. Like, this is a sci-fi story. Even Dracula's kind of sci-fi, but it's a little more mystical. Sci-fi feels kind of like a witchcraft setting compared to, I don't know, I would say Dracula feels more like medical in the way that they treat it too. Like, even like the doctors and stuff, or it is a doctor, I think, like a professor who's a doctor, like a PhD doctor, is the one who's like taking care of the situation. And it's kind of like, these are two different, really interesting fields, I guess. Whether it's kind of like scientific advancement or medical advancement. That's not, or, scientific outside of medicine advancement or medical advancement. But, just it's a really cool spectrum, I think, in just those two stories where, like, I think it's really cool that even though obviously we're getting an explicit Nosferatu movie on Christmas, and I'm not sure when, but next year we get a Frankenstein movie. It's really cool that that these two stories also just populate so many of my personal favorites that also end up being like these huge, conversation points. I could go into so many others, but like just the Substance and Honor that I mentioned, like vaguely, but I think intrinsically, crucially have a connection to these ideas, which I find so cool. Because I love that, and everybody else does too. Oh, and what I wanted to say about Frankenweenie, because I'll get back to this kind of conclusive tone, but I didn't say what I was going to say about Frankenweenie, that I think is really cool, and the Frankenstein's cat situation, is that when it's an animal, it's really easy not to worry about whether or not this animal still has the same consciousness as before. So kind of that kind of dilemma about whether or not it acknowledges the sanctity of matter and like the way that the soul is connected to the body kind of isn't a question at all here anymore, because they're not going to tell us. You know, it's kind of implied usually that they do still have their soul. And even in sometimes the human ones, it's implied that some part of them is the same. I actually personally maybe sometimes distinguish the soul as something that is connected a little bit to the body until it like dries up. And then the spirit as being something kind of else that that is shared by different people. Like there could be one spirit that everybody has, but everybody has a different like quote unquote soul that'll like, you know, be hanging out in heaven or whatever. But I also believe in reincarnation in that like one spirit sense. So that's kind of how I see those two ideas. Anyways, but so it's kind of like with a pet, you don't have to worry about their spirit being there and being manifest the way that it was before. You just like see that it still has the potential for intimacy, and that kind of makes it like work as a story. But Frankenweenie I was really moved by. Incredibly moving story. And it kind of like, I was really surprised by that. But it's just the way that he makes the dog come back because he loves it so much. It's like a young boy, and it's like something about little kids being connected to pets is so emotional to me, because you never kind of like, I think even as a parent, that's something that's really emotional to them, because you never expect that kind of like sensibility from a young person, I guess. And I think it's like, oh my gosh, this is what it was. I think he's trying to bring the dog back to life or something, and he's like, it's okay if you don't, oh my gosh, it's so sad. It's like, he's like, it's okay if you don't come back, like, I still love you, or something like that. And it's like so sad to me, because it's like you would expect a kid to be so like capricious about it and like want to have it their way. But then you realize that he actually just loves that dog, and like then that's what makes quote unquote like the resuscitation work, is what I find really cool, is that he had that love. And I thought it was just really cool that that actually in real life now as an adult I can look back and that feels still like such true emotion. And I think a lot of times, a lot of emotions we have to kind of eccentrify to make it marketable to kids, like especially how things are funny in movies and how things are scary. We can't make it too real, because then it won't be like approachable to the kid in the same way as like kind of a goofy cartoon sense is. But then that tenderness can kind of really go through and break that to me when it's done right. And I really like how it's able to be carried out. I think even in Frankenstein there's a couple really sad moments involving like how the author feels, or the narrator feels, about his family that he's lost and stuff like that. And it's like really moving. And that's kind of like something that I like about how there's this like kind of this gruesome approach to things, is that it's kind of like even though there's this like morbid rejection that the body is like the ultimate, you know, the ultimate thing to protect and take care of, like it's like a very kind of like, oh, let's just like put together a new body, ha ha ha. I think it's really cool that it recognizes that there's still, it's not actually like, it's never pessimistic and kind of like, what's the word? What's the word? Not what's it called? Not like oh my gosh, I'm saying mortalist. It's not like pessimistic and, I need to look up pessimistic synonyms. And wow, I'm just not gonna find it. It's not as like cynical, pessimistic, and kind of like what's that philosophical lens where everything is like hopeless? It doesn't feel like that. It could be that way in Frankenstein movies, but it doesn't feel that way. Existentialist, or what am I talking about? It doesn't feel nihilist. Okay, in Frankenstein movies, or in, you know, or in it doesn't feel nihilist in Frankenstein movies, even though the form is so random. And I like that in Lisa Frankenstein too. It's like there's so much morbidity in the way that the forms are kind of toyed with. And that doesn't shock you at all as a viewer. It's kind of funny AF, you know? But then you actually, like, still are able to see these tender moments and, like, feel like these are, like, people with emotional depth in a way that really separates, again, the soul from the body. And then in Dracula, I think what's really or like in the vampire situation, on the other hand, or whatever, I think it's really cool that when you connect kind of the body and the soul, the way that it's done in Dracula and in Dracula media, which I would think of in like Bones and all too, it's kind of like this idea that most of the time I would say, and I think zombie media is a lot of times, a weird kind of sometimes maybe mix of Frankenstein and Dracula, but a lot of Dracula in the sense that there's a contagious element to it, and in a way that they can spread this, and there's like an infection. I feel like it's like Frankenstein media a lot in the way that the forms are so goofy and also lack a full connection to their like previous soul. But the connection to Dracula media that I see is that there's kind of like a lot of the infection, and what I like about that is that it kind of feels like when we see like ideas like when people are taken advantage of, like, trigger warning, like sexually, and a lot of times in like really puritanical cultures, I'll put it like that, there can be a lot of judgment and shame on the kind of victim, and this view of them as having been like made dirty. And actually in this recent movie Kinds of Kindness, they kind of, I think, addressed this concept, I found a little bit shockingly. But there's a cult that's like kind of has a similar view on, you know, quote unquote, ways people can be defiled, end quote. But it's kind of like a little bit interesting to then see in Dracula movies a lot of the time. There's usually this redemption or this healing, and I know in the original book that's what happens. And I really like that we get to see, especially when it's like someone like, I know in the original book it's like a woman who, although there is kind of like this weird thing where like one of the women who's a little bit more modern and like free is not healed and like dies as a vampire. But the woman that's a little bit more puritanical, I keep using that word, I don't know why, a little more, you know, that woman is saved. But I think regardless, if we take that side out of it, it's so interesting to see redemption of people who find themselves taken advantage of or involved like this in one way or another. And I think it's another key part of any type of thing where like the monster is contagious. And that's why I really like how this applies to like how we can think of like psychological troubles specifically, maybe, and like how personality disorders and things like that lead to kind of like disorders in other people around them. It's kind of really interesting to look at how we can also approach healing and recovering from things that society, like, for so long just dismisses as things that like defile you and ruin you. And so in that way, I like that Dracula holds on to the quote-unquote like sanctity of the body, but still gives you the chance to heal yourself, you know, or whatever, through God, if it has to be that way. But still, it's like, it's better than just saying you're done. I don't like when the sort of like Christian value is just that it's like yes or no, you either did it right or you're done. And this feels like really kind of cool, where it's like the evil is not stronger than the good. And there's never, I always feel like that's a theme in like Dracula movies, is like, or in vampire content. Even like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure starts as vampire content. That's one of my favorite, that's like my favorite anime. What am I talking about? But it starts as vampire content, and I think that kind of sticks through to the end, or like throughout the whole thing a little bit. But it starts out as vampire content, and it's really it's really able to explore just like the triumph of good over evil as something that satisfies us and like can be explored in serious content, which is really funny to kind of like look at. But then I think it is cool to look at almost on the contrast in Frankenstein, this like this way that we can look at the soul rather than the body as something that needs redemption, and the body's just there. The body doesn't matter. For the body to be corrupted isn't really a problem. That's not really serious. But you who corrupted the body of someone else, especially, your soul is like, be scared. You're not going to be doing well. And I think that's a lot of the themes of Frankenstein, is just his angst with like knowing the guilt of like how he feels like he's defiled nature. He feels like literally he's done something dirty and gross. And so I think it's really cool. It's not as much this idea that, like in Dracula, in vampire movies, it's like if you're going to think of the body as something that is sacred, then you have to acknowledge that it can be corrupted. Or that at least evil would try to corrupt it. And that makes you kind of live with that by envisioning a way that good would be able to triumph over that still, and a person would be cured. But once you kind of see the body as being capable of healing, it's really interesting to look at the spirit as something, and in vampire movies there is corruption of the spirit a little bit, but it's so much acknowledged as being like an infectious thing that comes from the body. In Frankenstein media, to me, the corruption isn't like of anything there as much as it is kind of like, no, you just like created something, you worked with dirty materials and you did something dirty and unclean like to God, which makes you, like your soul, what's in question. And I think the whole point of the book feels like am I wrong? Am I the asshole on Reddit? And that's what I really like about that media, is it always pushes you to question the morality of the main characters. As opposed to Dracula, where it's like, no, the main character is automatically valid because of their victimization throughout the entire piece of media, usually, by the seductive vampire. But in Dracula content, the newborn Dracula can't be, or the newborn, Frankenstein content, the newborn quote-unquote Frankenstein can't be blamed as much for what's going on to them. At all, it's kind of this infantile evil, and it's more like whatever existed before that used its knowledge to intentionally, or at least to do something that led to it being failed. That thing needs to, reflect and give us a whole story that will let us reflect with them about whether or not they are redeemable, like spiritually, and how we feel as a reader and as the viewer about their story, and about whether or not their passion made what they did to something that could be considered sacred worth it. And I really like, in Lisa Frankenstein, I think of this as like being seen by how kind of morbid everything is, and how it's like she just wants like this, like she just wants some D, low-key, from Cole Sprouse. And, like, and so she brings him back to life. But I think it's really cool that that the whole movie is presented in this way where it's like, if you want to think of it as an unreliable narrator, that's fine. But you could also think of it as, like, if maybe there is a way that universe can still have her be redeemed, even with all that stuff going on. And it's kind of like this. That's why I think it kind of goes a lot more into this, I think that's what steampunk fits it for a little bit. This, like, Guillermo del Toro fantastical aspect, even though it isn't the real world usually. I think it pushes us into that, where it's kind of like you'll never want to fully make the character have to acknowledge the main character, the narrator, whoever it is, acknowledge the reality and gruesomeness of the situation, because there's so much beauty when you kind of just let the raw details be and let them be there, and instead focus on like the emotional connections. and the emotional depth of the interactions between characters. And I love that about that media. And then, we look at, like, this Lisa Frankenstein character where she's just kind of like this teenage girl, and, like, obviously we can't really blame her, but at the end of the day, it's like, with the music even, the author, it wouldn't give us a fun experience, and I think maybe if we want to look at it deeply, we wouldn't feel satisfied as much, like, with ourselves and literally with ourselves, if we couldn't, envision a way that this person's passions and what they did because of their passions was, like, were justified. And so I think it's really cool to have that playful attitude in Frankenstein movies about reality, while still kind of remaining not too crazy. But I think the playfulness about reality is so it creates such a wide, playground to explore from. You're not limited by what bodies can or can't do anymore in Frankenstein movies. And I love that. Like, it always, it feels cool to see that. But then that's kind of completely the opposite in, vampire situations to me, where it's like, it's always scientifically, really laid out. And there's always going to be, like, writings and texts and ancient, like, things that have been, like, measuring the capacities of vampires. And so it's kind of more this, like, this state of being, as opposed to the more goofy aspect of Frankenstein situations. And it kind of, I think, always is approached in a way more grave and kind of adult lens in vampire movies, where it feels like these are people that engage in just, like, more adult and, like, inappropriate, quote-unquote, topics than, like, the Dracula's. Dracula's kind of, like, a lot of times connects maybe to our childish kind of views of how we engaged with people that were older than us, and how we have angst about how much they knew about the world and what they gave us or what they did for us. And, when we realize, for example, when things were like abuse or abandonments when we're older, how we cope with that after developing that consciousness. That's, like, I think what people that connect to a Frankenstein monster think about. And I think a lot of times you're pushed to connect to the Frankenstein monster. But then you also kind of, feel a little bit of guilt and empathize with the shame of the scientist. But then on the other hand, when you empathize with the monster in Dracula, which I think is always, I think in any of these stories, for it to work really well, the monster has to be a little bit relatable. When you empathize with the vampire, it's about more how you feel, not in the situation where you have less kind of agency and less establishment, the same way that it is in Frankenstein. Like, it's not usually, I would say, maybe with an older person, yes, but not an older person that you feel like is, like, taking advantage of you or would have taken advantage of you. It more feels like you're in charge, and it's kind of the spectrum. And just in all these ways, I really like that we can explore, how we want to think about our bodies and their relationship with the world, and whether or not that is the same as our soul's relationship with the world and with other people. I think I've kind of gone into enough on that. I don't know how I talk so much. I felt like I was losing my train of thought at a lot of points, but I actually found it most of the time. I think I might have lost it once or twice, barely. But I do think most of the time I did find it. There's only one time at the end right now where I feel like I might have lost something. But I think I'm actually on it. But I'm just so excited for these new movies, like the Nosferatu one's going to be really, like, I'm, like, really excited for. I've only heard good things. It's going to be really, like, exciting for me to see. And I just heard about this Frankenstein stuff, and I just feel so like literally grounded in having these my favorites and being able to like really think about them so much all the time. But yeah, I hope this was stimulating, maybe to someone else even other than me. But to me, I love just talking about this.